Oh, yeah, you turn a ringer off. I was just thinking because since you're a judge, like you're always on call.
That's true. And I don't know if we're going to talk about it, but a lot of the warrant processes now are automated. And so I get warrants, requests for warrants, search warrants, and via my phone, and I review them and approve them on my phone. And I can get them, like you're saying, 24/7.
Yeah.
And I do. I get them, and that's fine. I've told law enforcement that I'm available 24/7. My children are grown. I don't have small kids in the house.
Yeah.
I can wake up and go right back to sleep. And that's a blessing.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Come on, let's go on a journey. Sit back, buckle up, enjoy the ride with Crystal Petrie Consulting.
Hello, my name is Crystal Petrie, and you are watching another episode of the Crystal Petrie Podcast. Today, I have the Honorable Judge Mitch Templeton here to educate me and you about being a judge, what it takes to be a judge, and why someone would even want to be a judge. So thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thanks for including me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. So, Judge Mitch Templeton, you are the judge for 172nd District Court in
Right.
Jefferson County, Texas.
Right.
Okay, so what do you do? I know that's a broad question.
Okay. But it's a good question. And we're sitting here, for those of you watching, we are actually in the courtroom,
Yes.
sitting at what is typically the defense side of the courtroom, the defendant's table where counsel sits. My job as the judge is to run the 172nd District Court. A district court, and the nomenclature and the way we label our courts, the names we give our courts in Texas is very confusing to most people, and I understand that. But a district court is the highest level of trial court in the state. If I hear a criminal matter, and this is a court of general jurisdiction, so I can hear any kind of case. If I hear a criminal case, it's a felony. Serious crimes, that's the highest level, the worst accused crimes. I don't hear traffic citations, I don't hear intermediate level, low level theft or shoplifting. I don't hear stuff like that. These are big cases. In the civil matters, the same way, unlimited damages, serious personal injury, breach of contract, construction defect cases, plant explosions, what we call torts. Like I said, unlimited damages. So we're the highest level trial court in the state of Texas. I'm a state district judge, so even though my jurisdiction is Jefferson County, Texas, I'm really an employee of the state and representative of the authority of the state of Texas. 85% of my salary, my personal overhead, everything related to me as a judge, is paid for by the state of Texas. But I'm housed in this facility that we're sitting in, this courtroom that we're in, is provided by statute by Jefferson County. They pay for the lights, they pay, my employees are county employees, and so it's kind of a divided system, if you will, county and state. And that's part of the confusing nomenclature because there are a lot of county judges.
Right.
Across the way,
Yes.
we have 2 county court of law. And those hear intermediate level crimes and misdemeanors, low level crimes. And they only have 6 people on the jury. We have 12 people on our jury. But people get confused. We're on the same floor of the same courthouse, but we're 2 different entities. I'm a state entity. They're a totally and wholly county entity governed by state law. It can be very confusing. And then down below on the first floor, we have our justice courts, justice of the peace courts,
Okay.
commonly referred to as the people's court. And that's a whole another level. They hear very low level, some misdemeanor cases. They'll have some traffic citations and other misdemeanor alleged crimes in their court, and they'll hear small dollar civil matters. My job as the judge is to facilitate the administration of justice culminating ultimately in a jury trial, if necessary. And so I have the facilities to do that. I've made the modifications to my courtroom to do that in a modern, technologically proficient, and what's expected nowadays manner. And it's my job to facilitate that, make sure it's all done correctly pursuant to state law.
Okay. Now, because you are a state district judge, does that mean you can hear cases from the entire state of Texas or just cases here in Jefferson County, Texas?
In this courtroom, we will only hear cases in Jefferson County unless venue is transferred to this court from another venue in the state of Texas. And I can be assigned to travel to another venue in the state of Texas and hear a case in a district court in a different county. I've been assigned only one time that I can think of. I've been on the bench 6 years, going on 6 years now. And I had been assigned to one case, and I think it was in county south of Houston. I can't remember which county it is. But anyway, it was another jurisdiction. The case settled before I even had to hear any pretrial matters or conduct a jury trial.
Okay.
So my authority can be expanded by assignment.
Your court is 172nd. What does that number mean, and how do you get that number?
I don't know the answer to that question, except that it relates directly, I'm a statutorily created court. So if you went on Westlaw or even Google, you could probably do it with a Google search, and look up the 172nd District Court, that was the number given to the court when it was statutorily created. I don't know if there's a procession, like if I'm the 172nd court created in Texas. I don't know. That's very possibly. I haven't actually, that's a good question. I haven't even considered looking that up. I do know that it's directly related to the statute that created the court.
What made you decide to pursue a career in law?
Great question. Growing up, a lot of people said you should consider a career in law. You know, you're very serious, you have very serious demeanor, you're a good student, you like to debate, you like to argue. Maybe argue is the better word. You should consider it. And I had gone to work for a company after undergraduate, in a company called NCR, Financial Systems, and I had been successful there for 2.5 years. The next step for me was to transfer me from Houston to Dayton, Ohio, and I did not want to do that. I'm a Texas guy. I love Texas, and I wanted to stay here. I wanted more autonomy. That was in the mid to late 80s. A lot of Fortune 500 companies were laying off mid-level managers. There was a lot of cutting and downsizing going on. The economy wasn't great. I didn't want to be susceptible to that. And so I made the decision to go to law school. And gave me more autonomy, let me come back to East Texas to be near my family and my wife's family.
Now, you were a lawyer before you became a judge.
Right.
Tell us about that experience. How did your life experiences help you be a better lawyer?
Great question. I was a lawyer in private practice for 28 years before I ran for, and we elect our judges in Texas, which I agree with. I think we should elect our judges.
I agree with that as well.
I wrote a paper on that in law school. There's a good argument it ought to be a down ballot, nonpartisan race, because
justice is supposed to be blind
and objective,
yes.
Completely right. And so, but I believe, however we do it, we should elect them. And the question was, I guess, what led me to be a judge, or how my life experiences led to that. First of all, I had excellent legal training at the University of Houston Law Center, and even in law school, when in mock trial and trial advocacy classes, you play, you do mock trials, and so you play a prosecutor, or you play a defense attorney, or you play a plaintiff's attorney, and you play a defense attorney. you have these roles that you play. Well, you also do judge. You're a judge sometimes.
Oh, okay.
Even as a student. And even as a student, when I was the judge, I would think, man, I'm really comfortable. I'm really, really comfortable doing this. Someday, I Lord willing, I may be a judge. And so I thought about it my whole career. And I think, you and I were talking before we started recording the show, but having a business degree, working in private commerce for a big company, being in the marketplace prepared me to be a lawyer, and it also makes me a better judge.
Okay.
I haven't just done the law. I sold financial computer systems to banks and savings and loans after my undergraduate degree. Before that, I've been working since I was 15. I worked construction, and I did appliance repair. I've been in the marketplace, and all of that has helped me be a better judge. I think people tend to specialize in their life, and that's fine. But, for example, someone that says when they're in their 8th grade, I'm going to be a lawyer. And so then they go to undergrad and they're pre-law and they study government or history or something with a pre-law designation, and then they go straight to law school. That can make them, I'm not saying they can't be a great lawyer or a great judge, but it tends to make them very narrowly focused. Well, that has not been my experience at all. I have a broad spectrum of life experience before I became a judge, and I personally feel like it makes me a much better judge to have had that broad experience.
I agree. And it's something that, because I love sports, that they talk about in sports as well. Instead of having your kid do baseball like from 3 years old until, let them like double and dabble and play in other sports to get kind of that broad focus on, the different sports and what you have to do to be good and the training and everything.
Right.
I think the same thing should apply to law. Like, you need to have a broad spectrum of life, of lived life, because you have so many people that come before you.
That's right. And so many people from such a broad spectrum of perspectives and life experiences and legal experiences and legal problems. And so when you've had a broad introduction educationally, experientially, and life in general, I think it makes you a better judge. And I've been blessed to have had that. I've just had so many opportunities, and I feel like that I've taken advantage of the opportunities that God and my family have provided me. And I think I'm a better judge for it.
You were a lawyer, Judge Templeton, for 28 years. Was there one thing in particular or a couple things in particular that made you decide, okay, the moment is now for me to run to become judge?
I had a group of people that asked me to run for this bench, and I'll never forget it. But anything that you do politically, if you were going to run for office, I really believe this. You can't, and I'm sure there's exceptions, but you can't just decide to do something on your own. But I really wasn't thinking about it, but I had a group of citizens come to me and say, we want you to run. This bench is coming open. Judge Floyd is aging out. He's got to retire by law, by state law. So the bench is going to be open. We want you to run for it, and we're going to support you and help you. And you've got to have that team effort. You've got to have a group of citizens that want to support you.
Yes.
And that was the moment for me when I was approached, and it just clicked. Yeah, now's the time, and I want to do it.
Did you have any challenges?
Yes.
And how did you overcome them?
Well, I had a lot of challenges because we do have partisan elections. I'm Republican, and my family has been Republican all the way back to President Eisenhower. So growing up in East Texas, we're politically irrelevant because the Democrat Party has run East Texas since really pretty much since the Civil War, because Abraham Lincoln was Republican.
Right.
And the South lost the Civil War,
right.
And so they became Democrats. And so my biggest challenge was there had never been a Republican elected to the district bench in Jefferson County, Texas.
Which I did not know that at all.
Right. But people told me you can't win.
What?
They said, you're the wrong party, and there's no way. We've never elected one, and you're not going to be the first. They said a lot of things that, and there were a lot of challenges, but I think I was uniquely situated and confident. And it's something that I cared deeply about winning, and I didn't go ask permission from anybody. I had people come to me and ask me to do it.
Right.
And so I cared what people thought, but to the extent that there are, kingmakers, so to speak, political operatives, I didn't go ask permission. I talked to the people that came to me, I prayed about it, talked to my wife about it, and made the decision to run. But that may be the biggest single hurdle that I had, because it just had never been done.
Yes.
And people don't like change. It's funny because people would tell me, I want change, and I would say, well, I'm the change. I hate to tell you this.
I am the change.
I'm the change. You don't, people they didn't realize that there had been basically one-party rule since the Civil War in Jefferson County.
I had not realized that at
No.
all. Does that feel like a heavy cross to bear, being the only Republican?
I'm not now, though,
Okay.
because Judge Free's been elected since me. And let me just say, everybody has been wonderful to me.
Yes.
It has not been a problem. It's only an issue on the campaign trail. And the irony of what we do in Texas is you're put through a hyper-partisan process, Republican, Democrat, and then if you win this job, that has to stop. In fact, the first day at judges school, they send you to the new judges school. And the first day, the first speaker, I'll never forget this, he gets up on stage and he says, okay, my job is to take you off the campaign trail because you're now a judge for everybody. I knew that,
Yeah.
and I knew that, and I think most people know that do this job, but it was helpful to have someone say it.
Out loud.
Yes, and then what does that look like? What does it mean to be nonpartisan in your review and your job efforts and your public persona, everything. So, and that's another thing. I mean, I still have strong political beliefs, and if you look at the ethics opinions, I'm still allowed to express my opinion on Republican versus Democrat policies and efforts, but I certainly cannot endorse individual candidates.
No candidate at all.
No, Republican or Democrat. And if you think about it, I mean, I could end up here in an election contest of some kind. And I've had people, but because I had a very successful campaign and I had a very successful outcome, I got a lot of votes. And I've had people try to, I guess kind of trade on that. Everything's digital now, so if I'm up here at some public political event, people will take a video of me and they'll put it in an ad or something. And if it's brought to my attention, or if I come across it or see it, I'll go, hey, man, you need to take that out. And because it's all digital, it's not a problem.
Exactly.
They do it.
Yes.
And it hasn't happened. It's only happened once or twice over 6 years. And so, but the partisanship is probably the biggest hurdle I've faced. And it continues to be a concern. I think they talk about it all the time at judicial conferences, because we do have a bipartisan oppositional system.
Yes.
And it mimics, the political system is mimicked by the court system, right? You create a crucible of ideas. Well, a courtroom is just a crucible of facts and the law applied to those facts.
Yes.
You've got a plaintiff, a defendant, a prosecution, a defendant. They both bring their case, they both bring the heat, so to speak. That refines whatever is in there, and hopefully you get pure justice.
Yes.
So and the political system is the same way. Republicans and Democrats, and we have lost sight of what we really used to do in terms of true debate.
You are correct.
True political discourse.
You are correct.
Where you have ideas, you bring them together in this crucible. It all gets considered and refined, and then the outcome is hopefully the correct decision.
Yes.
And that's how court works. But the point is, it's oppositional, and that's fine. And I preside over that all the time. It just can't be partisan.
Right. And the oppositional, to me, whether we're talking in the court or, in politics, it's supposed to bring out the best of the best.
Right.
Whichever side that may be, it's supposed to bring out the best. But you are correct, it has lost sight of that.
But don't lose hope.
I have not.
Because if you could look back through history, there have been incidents. Well, the Civil War is the most acute. 650,000 people died in that, or, more than any other war, and all the wars combined, I believe. But that's how bad it has gotten. And beyond that, forget that. That's a really dramatic and drastic example. But there have been fist fights on the floor of Congress. There have been people walking out, refusing to deliberate. There have been all kinds of acute bad behavior in our political system, and we have survived it thus far.
And we will continue to survive it.
I hope so. And you have it in courtrooms. We have survived it. I love watching the British Parliament. If you ever watch Questions to the Prime Minister on C-SPAN or some other public access, where they stand up and they yell questions at each other, and they all go, woo, and they roar and they clap, They really get after it.
They do.
And
sometimes it leads to fights.
Yeah, and we came from that system, and English common law, and we don't have a parliamentary system, but we have a similar system. And to the extent our Congress debates anymore, instead of just showboats, grandstands, and does commercials, it's supposed to reflect that debate.
It's supposed to.
Right.
Key word. What would you say, Judge, is the most fulfilling and rewarding part of your job?
That's a great question. There's a lot of it that I really, really like. One of the things that I promised the people that I would do, and have been able to fulfill that promise, is help with the criminal dockets. And I do arraignments. Judge Wortham is now the other district judge that's helping with arraignments, but for the first 4 years I was on the bench, I'm the only district judge that has helped with arraignments at the jail. And when you're doing criminal law and presiding over criminal law cases, you can become very cynical and hard-hearted. People lie. People they make bad decisions, and they continue to make bad decisions even when they get in the courtroom or get in front of a judge. And that's unfortunate. But you have to not get hard-hearted, because when you're first seeing people at arraignment, which is their first interaction after they've been arrested, you're admonishing them, you're apprising them of their rights, you're making an initial decision about whether or not they're going to get court-appointed counsel. You come across people that you can help. I'll give you a good example. We had a lady passing through our area on I-10, which brings a lot of people to our area, good and bad. And she and her significant other were at an RV park where they had stopped down on the way to Arizona, and they'd had a domestic fight, I'll call it.
Between the two
An
of them.
altercation. It's a man and a woman.
Okay.
This is an RV park near Lamar University, and I believe it was a Lamar University policeman that ended up responding to it. Now, looking at the police report, the probable cause affidavits, it was clear that he had arrested her and brought her in because he wanted to remove her
From the situation.
Right. Which was particularly enclosed because they were in an RV. She's not in a town she's familiar with.
Yes.
He's getting her out of that situation.
Yes.
She ends up in front of me. And she's like, Judge, if you will just call my family, I know they'll come get me. And they're in Florida and they're in Ohio. I listened to her. She seemed credible. She could have been completely lying to me. I have no interest in her staying in our county. I have really no real interest long-term litigating this situation.
Right. She doesn't live
They
here.
don't live here. We have enough to deal with on our own,
Yes.
with our own citizens. But I want her to be safe. I want to empathize with the situation that she's in. And sure enough, I called her family and they came running from Florida and from Ohio, and they came and picked her up. That is very fulfilling. You know, it took extra effort. I had to get those phone numbers. I had to call those people. I had to apprise them of what was going on. I had to make arrangements that she would be able to leave the jail. And those kind of outcomes are very fulfilling. But if you're hard-hearted and you've become blind to people's plight or what they're telling you because you don't believe them anymore, you're so cynical, you don't believe anybody, you leave her in a bad situation.
Right.
And that's what you have to guard against. It's one of the things you have to guard against. And that's very fulfilling.
How have you managed not to become cynical and hard-hearted?
It's mainly based on my faith. I'm a Christian. And so I start from the perspective that everybody that comes before me is created in the image of God. And because they are a created being, made in the image of God, they have inherent value. And they can diminish that value during their lifetime by their actions and the decisions that they make. I'm not saying that, but I start from that premise.
Okay.
And when you start from that premise and realize that they are just like you, no matter what station I may think, or you may think, or anybody that knows me may think, whatever station I may have risen to, I'm no better than them. I'm no worse than them. And so when you start from that premise, it helps you to not become cynical. Because I'm also instructed to treat others the way I want to be treated. And if I'm created and they're created in the image of God, and they have value and I have value, and I want to be faithful to what I've been instructed to do, I'm going to treat them the way I would want to be treated if I were in their situation. And it's a little more complicated than that, but that's the foundation where I start, and that has helped me, to my knowledge, not be cynical, and to be able to help people.
Have you had, I'm assuming that you have you had mentors in the judicial space that has helped you become the judge that you are today, and how did they help?
Well, it started before I became a judge. Mentorship is really key, I think, in the legal profession. And the big difference in lawyers that I see is not so much age related, it's not race related, it's not where they went to law school related, it is, have they been mentored by a seasoned, wise, excellent lawyer, or have they always been on their own, or have they maybe been mismentored by somebody? So it really started before I was a judge. Now, that said, I am always looking for mentors myself. I turned 60 last year, I'll be 61 next year. I will never stop looking for mentors. Whether that is in my hobbies, you know, I like archery, I like to shoot a bow and arrow. I look for people who have done that and have excelled at that, and I'm coachable in that area. Horsemanship, I raise animals. I'm always looking for mentors. And as a judge, you know, for example, Judge Stevens in the criminal district court across the way, John Stevens, has been an important mentor to me. When I initially started, I began helping in the drug impact court. I did hundreds and hundreds of drug impact court cases because Judge Gist got sick the first year I was on the bench. And I had promised that I would help, and they came to me and I helped, like I said I would. But he would go pull my transcripts and then look at them, and then he would come and say, hey, look, I think you could do a little better in this area or that area. And it's been a very, very important mentorship for me. He's given me some good advice. There's some things that I have been concerned about, and he has counseled me on and advised me on how I could accomplish or maybe misdirect my efforts, change my efforts, not misdirect, redirect my efforts in a way that would get a better outcome. He's been an important mentor.
Judge Templeton, you are the judge for what I would consider the highest court here.
Right.
In Jefferson County, Texas. What sacrifices, and I'm assuming that you have had to make some, what sacrifices have you had to make in your personal life that has helped you become this judge in this courtroom?
Well, I don't know that the sacrifices have made me a better judge. They're the realities of having to engage in the political process. That's a big sacrifice for your family. It takes over your life when you're trying to get elected. It's very, very laborious. Endless events, endless chicken dinners and barbecues. I gained so much weight, and it involves your family, and so that is a sacrifice. The pay, in particular in Texas, is a fraction of what I made in private practice. That is probably the biggest sacrifice. And that may sound, I don't know, it may sound materialistic, but it's just.
I don't think so.
It's reality.
Yes.
And so, but otherwise, that doesn't make me a better judge. It may make me more humble. It may make my existence more humble, and maybe God's teaching me something through that. But the sacrifices themselves, I don't think necessarily make you a better judge. They're just necessary to be a judge.
To be a judge, yes. What would you say from being in the community, your faith, how has those things impacted how you judge and how you rule in your court?
They have not. The promises I made to the community, I have kept. And one of the promises was to do what I'm doing. And I don't, when I say it, I don't want to seem flippant. It's just, I was who I was before I took the bench. And the process I went through, I don't think changed me. Everything that I went through in the 28 years leading up to it, and even longer, made me who I am. I don't think any sacrifices that I've made or anything that I went through from a campaign standpoint changed the type of judge I was going to be. It's given me a chance to prove to people that I meant what I said on the campaign trail. And even though literally at the time every other judge was in the opposition party, so to speak, they have given me the chance to keep my promises, which is in their best interest too, because they need help.
Right.
And they can trust me, and they have now learned and seen that they can trust me to make good judicial decisions and to handle my business, so to speak, if they send something over for me to work on, or if they ask me to go to another court like the drug impact court and help. There is an accountability factor. I'm not saying there's not. But I felt like I would have kept these promises, whether that existed or not, because that's who I am. And at 60 years old, you don't really change who you are. I don't think you can. I mean, it's miraculous if you need to make a good change.
I feel like the foundational person
That's right, it's
That's
there.
that's who you are yes.
Right, by the time I was elected, which, see, I'm 60, so I would have been 54, you know, that I am who I am.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one thing, you know, in a community this size, which is not a small community compared to like the community I was raised in, but, you know, people know you. And the opposition told me, we're gonna, and they literally told me this. They said, we've dug into you in your past. And I said, well, there's nothing there.
Yeah.
I married my high school sweetheart. I've been faithful to her my whole marriage.
Mm-hmm.
I pay my taxes. I pay my employees. And they were like, we know.
Because they dug in.
They dug. But, and so the point is, good, that's maybe, you know, I'm not saying I'm perfect. Of course I've made mistakes and I've sinned or done something wrong, you know, but nothing big. As humans, grade big versus small.
Yes.
Discretions or sins, but there's value in living your life that way.
It is.
Because when you decide to run for something, your opposition is going to dig into your past. Right. And if you have to answer a bunch of questions, now, unfortunately, I think people can still make stuff up, you know, but that didn't, and I told them, I said, if you come up with something, you're making it up. And I steeled myself, I prepared myself that might happen, but it didn't. The community's big enough to kind of be anonymous, but it's small enough to, people know who you are.
Mm-hmm.
And if they don't know what you're about, they can dig a little bit
and find out. Absolutely. You have been in the justice space over 30 years, Judge Templeton. What does that word mean to you, justice?
It's a complex word. It means a lot of things. It means living up to the Bill of Rights, mm-hmm. for one thing. America, as founded, is miraculous. The Bill of Rights, as written, is phenomenal. The problem is, it has, and I'm not casting aspersions at the country and our founders, because they're imperfect people. And you have to remember the world they were operating in at the time they wrote.
According to that time.
Yeah, according to that time.
Yeah.
But, so the problem is implementing the ideas. And there's you know, you can have a set of rules, mm-hmm. you can enumerate your rights, but living up to that, enforcing that, is a different thing. You can have a standard, but living up to that standard is a different thing. And that is what we have painfully, progressively, I think, moved toward. Mm-hmm. And we really don't need to reinvent the wheel. Mm-hmm. To the extent there are systematic problems, it's because we're not living up to the foundation, the founding. Abraham Lincoln had a lot to do with that, and we talked earlier about the lack of debate, but if you go back, I recently revisited a couple of years ago the Lincoln-Douglas debates, which were the debates, you know, preceding the Civil War, and they're just fantastic. And in Lincoln, as part of those debates, really reinvigorated the Declaration of Independence. The Declaration of Independence is not a legislative document. It's basically an angry letter to the British, to the Crown.
It is.
Saying, we're leaving.
We're leaving, yes.
But it says a lot more
mm-hmm.
than we're leaving.
But it's become so much more.
Well, and it's because of Lincoln.
Yeah.
He really reinvigorated it in the Lincoln-Douglas debates. I would encourage people, if you want to look back about how important July 4th is, how important the Declaration of Independence is, because there's a debate, you know, that's not my Independence Day, or I don't think we should celebrate it because these guys, you know, weren't perfect. Okay, fair enough. Go back and look at Lincoln and how he used those documents to bring us into a more perfect union, to live up to those ideals. It comes from the Declaration of Independence. Mm-hmm. He revived it and really reinvigorated it and made it a legal document. just to the force of his personality and his argument. That's incredible statesmanship, incredible debate. I encourage people. There were shorthand transcribers taking down those debates. That's how we know we have them. We have them.
Could you imagine being in that room?
And I think they were actually, most of them were open air.
Oh.
They had to hear, I mean, there were no sound systems, but they're transcribed, and so you can review them. And there's people that have just written about them if you don't want to review the actual debates, but the point is, to the extent we fall back or we treat people incorrectly or wrongly, it's because we lose sight of our foundation. We have to get to the implementation of them, and sometimes we implement them, and then we fall back in some other area. So anyway,
Do you think, speaking of sight, do you think justice is truly blind?
No, I really don't. We're working toward that every day, but I would like to think, for example, let's take a concept like presumption of innocence in the criminal context. And my wife and I were actually having this discussion this morning. People love to say that. You're presumed innocent unless you're proven to be guilty.
Yeah.
They actually misstate it. Judge Stevens always corrects people. They'll say you're innocent until proven guilty. No. Judge Stevens will say, no. It's guilty unless, innocent unless proven guilty.
Is that what it is?
Not until. Because until implies it's going to happen.
Oh.
And so that's a finer point that he frequently brings up during
Yes.
jury selection. He talks about it all the time in his public speaking. It's part of the mentoring that I've enjoyed, but that you asked about earlier. But people really don't. I mean, they don't. They don't bequeath that on accused people.
They do.
They
not.
don't presume innocence. In fact, they tend to presume guilt. That's why it's so hurtful when someone tells a lie or publishes a lie. Because the first word, it's a concept, a psychological concept. My understanding is known as primacy. We tend to believe the first thing we hear. And so it's like, no, you shouldn't do that because there's another side to the story. You're just hearing what someone's saying.
Yes.
And so, yeah, I don't know that it's blind. Because there's concepts like that even though we're striving for it, I'm not sure we're attaining it.
But I think the key word, Judge, is striving.
Right.
As long as we're always striving, I think we're going in the right direction.
Yeah, we've got to meet our goals, right? I mean, we can't. A football coach can't say, "Well, I tried to win. We worked hard. We really gave it the effort,
but we kept losing." You're going to get fired.
You're going to get fired. And so the system needs to, and look, it's not just actually attaining the goals. There's got to be a perception that it's fair.
Yeah.
It's like our elections. People are debating whether or not our elections are sound or safe or not. Well, there's a significant number of people on both sides who have questioned the integrity of elections. And so, yeah, it's and Bezos wrote a really good op-ed piece when the Washington Post, decided not to endorse a presidential candidate this last time. And he said it so well, I can't quote him, but there's the reality of whether or not elections have integrity, and then there's the perception of whether or not elections have integrity. They're two separate things,
Yes.
and they're both equally important. And the same with justice, I would think. It's not just enough to go, no, if you were in court and saw what happened, you would know it was a fair trial, no matter what you heard or read in the newspaper. Well, but if there's a perception in the community that it's not fair, you've got a problem. And how do you address it?
Right.
And there are multiple answers to that question. Maybe it's more transparency. Maybe, now you've got the criminal district courts in Jefferson County, they're YouTubing their criminal trials. So maybe people should watch it and see what's going on. If you have a question, if you think the criminal justice system in Jefferson County, Texas is not fair, or if it's biased or it's not blind, however you want to say it, watch the trials.
Right.
They're on YouTube now.
And you know, some people would say a person's perception is their reality. Like, it's one and the same.
Yes. And there's some people you're just not ever going to convince about anything.
Exactly.
But how do we balance the transparency? But because if you let cameras in the courtroom and you let the media in full force,
Is that invasion of privacy?
well, it's embarrassing to some people, and I don't know about invasion of privacy, but that can also drive a perception that things are not fair. If the media is turning it into a spectacle, if allowing the media in turns it into a spectacle, then, I can understand why courts have limited cameras in the courtroom, for example. The question is, for today's population, and for the situations that we're dealing with today, is it time to let more cameras in the courtroom? I think the answer to that is yes, and I think you're seeing more and more cameras in the courtroom.
And I think that started with the O.J. Simpson trial. Wasn't that the first national case that allowed cameras?
In our lifetime, it probably has, but you could go back further, and probably there were probably some really salacious cases that the media really pounced on. The Lindbergh baby case. There are other. We could go through history.
Yes.
But the O.J. trial, for people of our vintage, would stand out, and so that's why that would probably pop into your mind. But this isn't it's not a new issue or a new problem. It's like Ecclesiastes says, there's nothing new under the sun.
That's what it says.
and there's not really. But so these debates will be had, and there's the technology of today allows cameras in the courtroom, but we have significant evidentiary concerns with the advent of deepfake videos, audio, AI generated images.
Yes.
We're really entering an interesting and challenging time for the justice system.
I didn't even think about that, but you are absolutely correct.
I mean, if you look in this courtroom, your viewers really can't see it, but we have placed a real emphasis on audiovisual presentation.
Yes.
The jurors have their own high-definition screens. The witness has a high-definition screen. They're two large high-definition monitors. And I have my own monitor there on the bench. So every bit of that is made to handle digitally created imagery. And from an evidentiary standpoint, we've been able to, it's been reliable. What we present is reliable and can be cross-examined, can be tested. But we're getting to a point where I'm not so sure that's going to be as easy to do as it has been in the past.
Yeah.
So this evidence is going to continue to be important. How do we make sure it's credible? How do we test it? How do we present it?
Which is the striving part.
Right. And it's a new challenge.
Yes.
And we're still going to have all these old challenges. You're going to have the old equal protection, the bias, the prejudice, the issues you've kind of hit on here a little bit. Now we're going to have all these new technological based issues. The technology is there to create or fabricate evidence. What do we do about that?
I think you could be the judge to solve it.
I'm going to have to deal with it some way.
Yeah. Yes. Judge, how do you ensure impartiality in your courtroom, especially in emotional, controversial court cases?
The tone that I set,
Okay.
not allowing myself to be caught up in the emotion of an emotional case. I'm a human being. Obviously, I feel emotion. The first instruction every jury gets, the first, number one court instruction, do not let bias, sympathy, or prejudice play any role in your deliberation. Well, if that's the number one instruction from me to them, from the state of Texas to them, then certainly it should govern what I do.
Right.
I'm the gatekeeper of evidence, and it's up to me to set a tone, to set a mood, and to control the emotion in the courtroom.
How do you balance strict adherence to the law with ensuring fair outcomes for individuals who may face systematic inequalities?
There are a number of ways to do that. And in a criminal context, making sure they have competent counsel. If they can't afford counsel, then they have a constitutional right for counsel to be appointed to them. And you need to make sure that individual, he or she, is doing their job. And that's very important. That's very critical. There are other technical issues that we follow. In criminal context, for example, in Texas, you're not going to see a defendant sitting at the table in an orange or red jumpsuit.
I remember when that law was passed.
Yeah.
Yes.
You're going to see them in a set of clothes.
Right.
They're typically going to be unshackled. Some people are dangerous, and you have to restrain them.
Right.
So there's a balancing act. But I think competent counsel is the main. Make sure everyone's fairly represented. From a purely legal standpoint, I do have discretion, and there is law. There are rules, there are laws, but there's also equity.
Yes.
In the American system of jurisprudence. And I can make sure that there is equity in outcomes. I have a lot of discretion in that regard. And so I think any good judge is thinking about that. There's sometimes you don't have discretion, but there's a lot of discretion in the Texas system, I would say. That's why who we elect as our judges is very important.
Exactly. What do you believe is the most important quality that a judge should have? And I would assume there's probably more than one, but...
Wisdom. And that's a broad term also, but the Bible says fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. And so that's where it starts with me, of course. But I pray for wisdom frequently. And then wisdom, I heard it said this way, I think. Wisdom is knowing that a tomato is a fruit. No, knowledge is knowing that tomatoes are fruit. Wisdom is not putting it on your ice cream.
Yeah.
Right?
I've heard that one.
Or something like that.
Yes.
And so
yes.
There's a big difference between wisdom and knowledge. And knowing what you ought to do and doing what you ought to do are two different things.
That could be so
And
hard.
just because you have the right to do something doesn't mean you necessarily ought
To do
it. And so wisdom is the most important to be a good judge.
Have you had any cases where the law and your morality conflicted? And how did you handle that if that was the case?
None come to mind. In 6 years, I've been on the bench 6 years. No, and honestly, it's hard for me to imagine that it will rise. But I should think about it. I should maybe think about that and prepare myself for it. But no, it has not been a problem.
How do you handle public or political pressure? Because you do have an elected official role. How do you handle that when making your judgments?
I'd be lying if I said it never entered my mind. But ultimately, I have to be independent. That's part of my charge as a judge, judicial independence and integrity. And that's the way I handle it. I default to, I've got to do what's right. I can't do necessarily what this individual firm or these individual lawyers want or the community expects. I've got to do what's right. Mm-hmm. And it really hasn't been a big conflict. And a lot of people, I think, do understand they're not down here. They're not seeing what I'm seeing. And so if I make a decision that seems unpopular or incorrect, I think that there is a significant amount of grace afforded to what I do.
If someone wants to become a judge, someone that's listening, someone that's watching this podcast, what advice would you give them about becoming a judge?
I probably wouldn't set out as becoming a judge as a career goal.
Okay.
I would, if you're talking about the district court level, like justices of the peace don't even have to be lawyers, and so I guess that's kind of a whole different animal, and they may want to do that job. Mm-hmm. But whatever you do, I tell people this all the time. I went to law school with doctors, teachers,
wow.
nurses, engineers, ex-military. You don't have to follow a set certain course to go to law school. And I think it's beneficial to do other things, like I've already alluded to, mm-hmm. outside of the law before you go to law school. And so I would, but that said, whatever you do, make good grades. Because they're going to look at your grades.
When you go to law school?
When you go to law school.
Okay.
If, let's say, you're going for the judicial route that requires you to be a lawyer, you need to make good grades. If you go to nursing school, you need to make good grades. If you're an engineer, you need to make good grades. Mm-hmm. Whatever you do it to the best of your ability, make the best grades you can make. Then get a broad experience, be successful at whatever you do, and then get into the best law school that you can go to. Prepare yourself, then practice law, and try to do it in a situation where you're properly mentored by good lawyers, experienced lawyers who exhibit the traits that we've talked about that make you a good judge. That's my advice, and that's kind of general and broad. But the other thing is, you may get into it, if you're, let's say that, okay, I'm going to study government and be pre-law. Okay. That's fine, but let's say that you get into it and you're like, I don't want to go to law school. Or let's say you have some life-altering event that doesn't allow you to go to law school. Then what have you prepared yourself for?
Oh, that's true.
And I tend to look at education vocationally. Mm-hmm. I think it's kind of my blue-collar, middle-class upbringing. Academia, just for the sake of thought and academic exercise, has its place. But I've kind of never been, that's a luxury that I have not afforded myself. It's like, I've been thinking, okay, if I study this, these are the jobs I can do. Or this prepares me for this path. And I think that's personally how I've advised my children. And that's the same advice I would give to people. Prepare yourself vocationally. Because there is no one direct path.
To anything.
There really isn't.
Yeah.
But good grades are always going to be looked at. Mm-hmm. Good behavior. Mm-hmm. Don't get a felony.
Yeah.
Don't get a felony, or don't even get misdemeanors. I knew people that had to answer a bunch of questions for stuff that they did.
I was going to ask you about that.
College or high school to get into law school.
Wow.
And you don't want to mess with that. Stay away from that. It's kind of like what I was saying earlier. Live your life, set a standard, stick to your standards, and then you don't have to answer a bunch of questions later or jump over hurdles that you created yourself to get somewhere you want to go.
Exactly. Even though, maybe you were young and dumb, like they say, right. Try not to make those choices right. that would lead to those circumstances.
It's funny because people will say, some NFL player, for example, mm-hmm. will get in trouble, or some college, player, some kind of famous, semi-famous, famous enough to make the news. And they'll go, well, they're young, they're just 25. And I'm like, they're 25.
They're 25.
They're an adult.
Yes.
And they've been an adult for 7 years.
Yes.
I'm sorry. The law, criminally, they're an adult and they're 17. And so, 25, you need to be behaving.
Right.
It's not, they'll say it about a 30-year-old. Well, they're young. Well, they're 30. I mean, when do you quit saying it as an excuse that someone is young?
It's the same thing, then we'll get back to our topic, Judge. It's the same thing when you have like the 60 and the 70-year-olds still blaming their parents. Like, I get it, mom or dad probably did something horrible, but at what age do you stop blaming and just accept accountability?
Yeah, in my own life, there's a couple of things that I think, well, I could have done this or I should have done that. And then I can think, well, I would have, but for someone else. And I'm like, no, dude. At some point, I'm responsible for every aspect.
Yeah.
Now, there's things that are out of your control that happen to you. I'm not talking about that.
Exactly.
But there are things that I could have done, I didn't do. It's on me.
Yeah.
And ultimately, it's all on, the buck stops here, like Harry Truman said. It's my responsibility. And people need to take responsibility. They need to take responsibility at a young age.
Right. And you definitely, I feel like you have to be taught responsibility.
It's very helpful.
Yeah, to be taught that.
No, to have a good example. I was blessed. I have a two-parent household. My dad got up and went to work every day. My mom was a great mom, and she went to work every day. And we had a standard of behavior that was to be met. And if it wasn't met, we were punished appropriately, not abusively.
Right.
And in my opinion. And that's a blessing.
It is.
And my biggest concern, if I got in trouble at school, wasn't the administrator or the teacher.
It was the parents.
It was my parents. And it wasn't even the fear of the punishment that would be doled out. It would be letting them down because I had failed their standard. And that didn't happen very often, thankfully. But it's because what you said, I mean, that stuff is learned.
Yeah.
Now, there are people that don't have an ideal situation, or they may have a terrible situation growing up. There's still accountability.
Yeah.
At some level, at some
some
point.
age, there's accountability.
Right.
There is. What about leadership traits? What leadership traits do you think are important for presiding as a judge in a courtroom?
Okay, you have to be decisive. You have to be able to make mostly correct decisions quickly. That is a learned, I think, trait. That is something that is experienced and practiced and exemplified by coaches, teachers, parents as you're coming up. But that's super important. You got to make substantive, important decisions, and frequently those have to be made quickly. Objection, sustain, or rule that quick.
Yeah.
You gotta know your craft, and it's like look at these NFL refs. I mean, even they need to take breaks and confer sometimes. And as a judge, I can take something under advisement or take a break and read some cases or what have you. But they have to make decisions quickly.
Very quickly.
And on the fly. And now they have backup. They have instant replay and everything's helping them, so the job is a little bit easier and more correct. But it's like that. It's like being a referee. And so you can't really fear criticism. You can't fear someone being mad at you for making a decision. And you got to make this substantive decision quickly.
How do you de-escalate? Like if somebody does get mad at you or gets mad at a witness, that's the word I'm looking for, a witness or something like that. How do you de-escalate that?
Take a break.
Okay.
And then, if need be, pull everybody back in chambers, talk to them. Sometimes you talk to them in a you try to calmly reassure them. Other times you fuss at them. And knowing the difference, knowing the personality of the attorneys and what they're dealing with, having done what they're now doing, having done that for 28 years, most situations I can relate to.
Yes.
And having the empathy that creates in you, and exercising that empathy will calm people down most of the time. I do have authority. I mean, I can sanction people. I can find people in contempt. I can put people in jail. I haven't had to do that. I haven't really even come close to doing that. I have had to fuss at people.
Okay. What do you think about term limits? And I was asking this question before I realized, and you told me this before we started recording, that a judge ages out at 72 years old.
I think it's 72, and
Yeah.
you may remember, not this past election, but the one before, or the one before that, there was a referendum that the people of Texas voted on raising the judicial retirement age
I remember
to
this.
75, I think.
I remember this.
It failed.
I don't remember the exact age, but I remember that, yes.
It failed.
It did.
And I think it, and this is just an opinion, you didn't ask it, but I'm gonna tell you, I think it failed because Trump and Biden are both so old.
You think so?
Yeah, I
didn't
do.
even think about that.
I think our prominent presidential candidates at the time are both so old that there's a lot of people, maybe a lot of people watching.
Yeah.
You just kind of gave me the demographic of your viewing audience. And they said, no, man, we're tired of old people hanging around too long. The interesting thing is, I
Yes.
think, number one, being the president and being a judge are very different
Yes.
jobs. To be the president takes a ton of physical rigor. I mean, it's just demanding 24/7. A judge is not like that. Being a judge is not like that. So that's one thing. But the Chief Justice of the Texas Supreme Court, because that law, Justice Hecht, is aging out because it didn't pass. He is now being forced to retire. And he's being and would certainly probably be reelected for another term.
Right.
So the people have spoken, and people age out. Term limits for judges, I'm assuming you're asking
Yes.
for, because I have two. I used to be in favor of term limits.
Okay.
I'm not so much anymore.
Was that before or after you became a judge?
Oh no, it was before.
Okay.
I became a judge. It has nothing to do with me being a judge in particular. And of course, I'm 60, so I'm 12 years away from 72. Maybe if I stay on the job until I'm 72, I may have a different feeling then. I don't know what I'll feel like in 12 years, but I don't have a problem with the people setting a limit.
Okay.
I understand. I really think it's a little bit lazy. I think people ought to be looked at individually, just like I think I should look at people individually.
Right.
I shouldn't say, oh, he's old, therefore, or they're white, therefore, or they're black, therefore. No, you don't do that. You gotta look at the person individually and make a decision. Age is the same way.
Right.
So I would wish that we did that for all of our candidates instead of aging them out, but I understand. It's kind of like the difficult decision to say mom or dad can't drive anymore.
Yeah.
Well, there's 90-year-olds that are great drivers,
Yes.
but there's 75-year-olds that are dangerous.
And there's 16-year-olds and 17-year-olds that are dangerous.
Yeah, and so you need to judge people individually, right? And yet, when it comes to judges, we've got a hard line age. But I'm not particularly worked up about it, but it is something to think about. I don't know that it's a good thing, because I think we could probably lose some good leadership and some good judges because of the age limit. The number of terms served, I don't think that should matter, and judges in particular. I understand the arguments from a legislative standpoint, and that's a whole different discussion, but judges I don't think should have term limits.
What do you think the future of being a judge in courtrooms, what does that look like? I feel like, and we were talking about this earlier, your courtroom is very techy.
Right.
Of course, I feel like technology is going to be the future in the courtrooms, but really outside of that, what do you think is the future of courts and judges?
It's going to be more of what we've already begun to see.
Okay.
the last two, maybe the last three trials that we had, two of which were medical liability trials. We had a big trucking accident case. We had multiple witnesses in those three trials testify via Zoom. Now, we have for years been videotaping, and I use the term videotape loosely.
Yes.
Digitally recording, in most cases, people giving depositions,
Right.
which are then played in the courtroom. But we are now at a point where, by agreement, the parties are allowing, in particular, expert witnesses to testify via Zoom. We had and I think every case has been doctors. We might have had a reconstructionist, or I think every witness that has testified on Zoom has been a medical doctor. We had one in Mexico City testify live in our trial, in our courtroom via Zoom. We had a lawyer that was on his way to Poland, and he had stopped over in Spain, and he testified from Spain. And we had doctors from, did I say lawyer? It was a doctor. We had doctors doctor that testified from Arizona, and then we had doctors testify from Houston in our courtroom via Zoom, by agreement of the parties. You're going to see more of that.
Okay.
As the technology improves, and you can actually see, maybe in 3D even, and certainly in high definition, so that you can see people's face, you can see their respiration, so people can judge their credibility as a witness. It may even be allowed for by the rules, not just by agreement of the parties. You're going to see more of that. The big concern, and we've already talked about it, is the struggle to make sure that evidence is not fabricated, it is credible.
Yes, yes. What do you think, and that could be a challenge for today, what do you think is the biggest challenge of the court today?
That's a great question. And I'm not trying, I feel so blessed. I have a great staff. I believe in the system. We have a great district clerk who sends me my juries, and has automated that system. That's all internet-based now.
Yes.
Oh man, what's the biggest challenge would probably be apathy.
Okay.
People wanting to serve on the juries. Good people showing up, not making excuses to get out of jury duty. That's probably the biggest challenge, apathy. And that's our whole system. Our whole system relies on the participation of the citizen. Jesus told the people of his day, render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's. And people will use that as an excuse, that biblical excuse, if you will, not to participate. They'll say, well, the government's one thing, I'm a Christian, I'm a believer, I don't want to participate. Well, in our system, you are Caesar. We're a government of the people, for the people,
And
by the people. And unlike the system that he was operating and teaching in his ministry, we don't have a true Caesar. Yeah, we have a president. Yes, we have an elected assembly, which is Congress, at a state and national level. But you are the government, and we need you to participate. We need you to show up and vote. We need you to show up and serve on a jury.
Yes.
It's a fundamental and super important part of self-governance. If we're to continue to have self-governance, we can have a jury system. I believe, my partner, Kent Chambers, who's now in the Ninth Court of Appeals, he used to say this all the time. Juries should make more decisions, not fewer decisions. And I agree with that. It's self-governance. When you make a decision in a case, in some way you're setting a community standard. So if you care about community standards, which you should, you need to show up and serve. And that's probably our biggest challenge.
Yes. And how do you think we combat that? How do you get more people to serve?
You make it more efficient.
Okay.
You make it easier on them. And that's what's great about the jury system that Jamie Smith has implemented.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when you go on there and you get a summons, it gives you the website. You go to the website.
Right.
You select the weeks that you think will be better for you. Okay? That makes it easier to serve. We've recently increased jury pay. It's still, not probably what it should be, but it's more than it was. And then you don't waste their time. If they're waiting, if they're standing around waiting, that's on me. And in the rare circumstances that ends up happening in my court, I talk to them. I tell them what's going on and why they're waiting.
Yeah.
You don't treat them like mushrooms, keeping them in the dark,
Yes.
and feeding them you know what.
Yes.
You tell them what's going on. I've had them come in. I've had the case, I'll bring in a jury in the afternoons on Monday. I've had a civil case settled that morning at pretrial. The evidence is literally in the courtroom still. And it's too late for me to send a notice to not show up. So they're here. I bring them in. I'll show them some of the evidence. Hey, this was the case. Look at the pictures. This is the pictures of the wreck.
Oh, wow.
Here's actually an X-ray.
Yeah.
And it's all in here. This is what you would have seen, but I'm happy to tell you, they settled. And
Yeah.
guess what? You didn't waste your time, because you know what it took for them to settle? It got real, because they know you were coming in at 1:30. You didn't waste your time. You moved this case.
Yeah.
And it didn't take you a week of listening to testimony and deliberating to do it. You signed up. You generated a list. You showed up. The case settled.
Yeah.
Don't think you wasted your time. And I tell them all that.
Yes.
I take the time to do it. The days of, oh, well, they don't need to know what happened, or just let them go.
Are over.
That's over in my world. It never existed in my world.
Yeah.
I was never going to run my courtroom that way, and I haven't. And that's part of the transparency. And if you let people know, if you explain it to them, a lot of times they'll go, oh, I didn't think about that. I didn't think about it that way. All I know is I showed up and I didn't do anything.
Right.
Wasted my time. No, you didn't.
Mm-hmm.
You did not waste your time.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter if it's a civil case or a criminal case across the way. You don't know what's going on behind those walls. You don't understand the cases that you're moving just by signing up and showing up. Don't lose faith in it, because you were moving cases, but you got to explain that to them. I've been married for 38 years. I still got to tell my wife I love her. I told you I loved you the day I married you. No, that's not good enough. You got to keep telling them. You got to tell these juries, thank you.
Yeah.
You got to tell them, this is what happened because you signed up and showed up.
Absolutely.
You can't just assume they realize it or know it.
Yeah.
They don't.
Yeah.
Maybe they should. Maybe they should have. Maybe they should have paid better attention to civics class. But they're busy.
Yeah.
They've got life,
Yeah.
and they get distracted or they forget things that they got taught in high school 20 or 30 years ago. Remind them. Don't waste their time. Anyway, so that's how we combat that.
Judge, what do you think needs to be done, or what more do you think can be done to address systematic racism within the courts?
It's like I said earlier, all the tools are in place to prevent any systemic abuse, whether it's racial, age, whatever. We have an equal protection clause. We had it for decades before we actually implemented it. Okay? And so, again, I'm not, people are where they are and people struggle to get where they need to be. So I'm not trying to diss our forefathers, but it's the same tools are in place now. We just have to make sure they're implemented. That's the main thing. We have to elect good people,
Right.
and we need to implement what we have. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. Read the Constitution. Read the Bill of Rights. So we have a First Amendment. Well, we never had it. We never had the First Amendment arise in the context of the government asking YouTube not to play videos, or asking X or whatever, Elon Musk, whatever, what was it? Twitter.
Mm-hmm.
Asking Twitter accounts to be taken down. Well, no. With First Amendment, you can't do that.
Mm-hmm.
But no one ever thought about it in the context, I think, of social media.
No.
Well, now there's litigation, and it's coming down the pike, and there's going to be Supreme Court opinions out of all that, and all that happened during COVID, So, again, I understand. You understand how we get ourselves in these situations because
Right.
it's a new context.
Yes.
It's in the context of social media now. But the First Amendment was there. How did we lose sight of it?
That's a great question.
And so it's the same with racial discrimination or systemic problems of any kind. First of all, know what your foundation is. Have a good grasp and understanding of it, which we all are supposed to have if we all went to public school, and then implement it. That's the answer.
Yeah.
You don't need to reinvent the wheel. We don't need a new commission. We don't need another governmental agency. We need to implement and follow our God-ordained rights as set out in our Constitution and our founding documents.
Yes, that's a great answer.
That's how I feel.
Great. That's a great answer. Okay, Judge, we are getting ready to wrap up on this interview, so I have a couple more questions for you.
Yeah.
You have been a judge for 6 years at this point, going on 6 years. What is your intention in this space as a judge?
Well, you've seen a lot of it. My intention, and we have fulfilled a lot of it, was to bring the courtroom up to snuff, up to modern standards. Our connectivity, our presentation tools are now as good as any, certainly in the state, if not the nation. So that intention has kind of been met. We're already talking about going further as we see the technology evolve. My intention is to continue to be active in helping move the criminal docket. So beyond that, I don't have any intention. I don't have any grandiose plans to form a specialty court, although I think about those kind of things all the time. What I personally have to decide, if the people decide to reelect me for another term, do I serve? How long will I serve after that? Do I finish out my career on the bench? Do I finish out my term in private practice? And that's something that I'm prayerfully considering, of course, with my wife. But those are my intentions. We can't rest on our laurels. We can't rest on what we've accomplished from a technological standpoint. And we're just going to keep growing and adapting from this point forward. I don't think, we can't say, okay, I've got the high definition presentation down, because it's going to keep changing. The technology's going to keep changing.
Yeah. As soon as you get it down, something new will come.
Yeah, and when these lawyers come in, the best and the most well-funded attorneys typically come in with their own IT department. They have their own technology people, and they don't struggle with anything. If they came in and I had loafed and hadn't done anything, they would get something figured out.
Yes.
But where I want to be is the most basic unfunded practitioner can still come in, take his or her paper documents, because they at least got to have paper. I can't, if you don't have paper documents, I probably can't help you.
Yeah.
But I guess I could help in some ways, but I would expect you at least to have paper documents. We have a digital Elmo. They can lay them up there, and they're projected, just like you've seen
Yes.
with the USB ports and the other things that we have. But the continuation of that, we're talking about Cat5 technology for our cabling, for our connectivity. The use of Zoom is something that I will be pursuing and encouraging. But one of the complaints about civil litigation in particular is it's too expensive. Well, if your expert can appear via Zoom and you don't have to pay him or her to fly to Beaumont, Texas, I'm going to save you a bunch of money. And both sides can benefit from this.
Yes.
So I'll continue to do those things. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yes, absolutely.
But you know, it's not like I'm not making widgets here. And that's something that the legislature has, you know, and it's an accountability thing. I'm fine with accountability. I've always had to be accountable, no matter what job I've done. But you know, they want to know how many cases I'm moving, how many cases I'm clearing. Well, I'm not making widgets here. This is not. I'm not cranking out plastic parts for your motorcycle. You know, I'm administering trials, which are of varying lengths, of varying sophistication.
For human beings. Yes.
And I can't guarantee you that I can crank out 50 trials, you know, in a year. But I understand, and I'm fine with the numbers I've generated since I've been here. It's just not. It's not something I can sit here and tell you. I will try 50 cases each year for the next term of my service. You know, I can promise you that I will continue to be sensitive to the things that we have talked about, and that I will do my best to facilitate efficient but fair to everybody justice.
Okay. My final question for you, Judge, who do you think will make a great guest on the podcast, but you have to help me get them on?
Yeah, that's no problem. I've already thought about it because you gave me a heads up. But you need to talk to Gordon Freeze, Judge Freeze, because he's a state district judge like me, but he presides over a family law court, which is designated only for family law cases. They also get involved in our juvenile justice system. So he has a perspective that I've never, in private practice or as a judge, enjoyed. I've never been involved in. I know about it from law school and just from, you know, general discussion at judicial conferences and as a lawyer. But he's got a different perspective and a unique factual perspective that I don't have. And you really, I think, might find some interesting fodder and content for your viewers.
That's going to be good. Thank you so much for sitting down with me.
Absolutely. I've enjoyed it. Thank you for including me.
Absolutely, absolutely. And to my audience, thank you so much for tuning in and watching. You can get Judge Templeton's podcast on YouTube Podcasts and Apple Podcasts. And remember, you always have time to listen and learn on the go.
Come on, let's go on a journey. Sit back, buckle up, enjoy the ride with Crystal Petrie.